Okay, good evening everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you Spirit Team for organizing this wonderful event. And it's really my privilege and pleasure to introduce revered Swami Atmarupananda Maharaj. He was born in the United States of America, and he discovered the Vedanta tradition of Hinduism while studying as an exchange student in Sweden, and developed what has become a lifelong fascination and dedication for him. He joined the Chicago branch of Ramakrishna Order of India as a monk in 1969. And before we get on to that, so 1969, at the age of 19, and was initiated by the 10th president of the order, Swami Atmarupananda. And he subsequently spent many years in India, engaged in monastic, scholarly, and spiritual training. Altogether, he has spent almost 14 years in India and 36 years working for the order in America. Okay. So, without further delay, please.
Thank you, and I'm very glad to be here, very glad to see all of you, and to see some faces that I saw today noon at the university, and many new faces. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here, and as I said, for those of you who were there this morning, it will be a repetition of this one statement. I always wanted to come to North Dakota. And that sounds strange for some people. People say, well, North Dakota is where people want to avoid because of the cold and the snow. But no, I've always wanted to come here. This is my first time to North Dakota. I'm only here last night and today, and I leave in the first thing in the morning. So hopefully I'll get to come back and see more than just Fargo, though Fargo is a beautiful town. I've spent most of my life in small towns, or in the countryside, or in the wilderness, and so I love small town life. In 1969, I was just before I joined the order, and didn't yet know I was going to join the order, but it was going from South Dakota, leaving South Dakota, that I came to the decision that I wanted to lead a monastic life, and so this was a very important time in my life, 50 years ago this year, and South Dakota also has been a place that I remember with great love, even though I can't say that I know it. I only hitchhiked across it, but I enjoyed every minute in South Dakota, so I always wanted to come here to see North Dakota as well. So glad to be here. So the topic this evening is the art of inner joy. So this noontime, for the handful of you who were there in the University at noontime, I spoke on a very different subject. So the tone and nature of this talk will be quite different. Good, because otherwise you'd be getting a repetition. So the art of inner joy. The art of inner joy indicates that we can learn to be joyful. And that's true. And it also indicates that there are different types of joy. Otherwise, why specify inner joy? We could just, the art of joy, but the art of inner joy. As I'll explain, all joy is inner, which will become, which is fairly obvious, but I'll explain that. But there is joy which is more consciously inner, and then that which is less consciously inner joy. That is, we experience joy inside. We don't experience joy out there. So all joy is inner. But some is quite consciously inner. And joy which brings us into the center of our being. Now, everyone, of course, knows of the Dalai Lama, a great modern teacher, the one who I've been blessed to meet. I forget whether it's 3 or 4 times. I won't stop to count now. But 3 or 4 times, a wonderful man. And one of his central teachings is that everyone wants to be happy. And And that's true. Everyone wants to be happy. We don't find anyone who doesn't want to be happy, though we find lots of people, and sometimes ourselves, who do everything but what would make us happy. And so sometimes we can even be addicted to unhappiness. That's quite possible, and that's quite common, actually. It's very common. In fact, when I was about to take my final vows as a Swami, which in our order is after 9 years of training, one of my teachers told me that when you take the vows of sannyasa, that is final monastic vows, it's the renunciation of joy and sorrow. And that's how strange, the renunciation of joy. He's talking about the types of external happiness that we generally are seeking, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But the important point, and what I had not heard before, but it immediately made sense, was that it was the renunciation of sorrow. And so let's get into what joy is. Well, no, one other introductory thing I wanted to say, then we'll get into what joy is. Trying to understand the nature of joy and then types of joy, etc. So, Swami Vivekananda, you don't need to remember the name, it's a very difficult name, but he was the one who brought our tradition to the United States in 1893. And in his time, believe it or not, his name was a household word in the U.S. He was very well known in his time. In fact, in 1976, the bicentennial year, the Smithsonian Institution published a book on, I believe it was 20-something, but I think it was 27, foreigners who had a profound influence on the United States. And among those 27, they mentioned Swami Vivekananda, among most of you probably not even heard of. But he did have a profound influence here in his time. And so he said that happiness is not the goal of humanity. Dalai Lama says everyone wants to be happy, and we respond to that and think, well, yes, of course, everybody wants to be happy. But he said something which sounds quite different. It's not really, but it sounds different. He said that the problem in life is that we think happiness is the goal. Now, this is a very important idea. It's crucial to what I'm going to talk about. We think happiness is the goal of life. What happens when we think happiness is the goal of life? Then we seek happiness and try to avoid unhappiness. And has anyone succeeded at that, ever? No one has ever succeeded in that. And so that sets up a tension. I want to run towards happiness, and when I feel happiness, I want to grab it and hold on to it, and I want to avoid sorrow. And that's the cause of a tremendous amount of sorrow in life. So many people over the decades have come up to someone like me and say, Swami, I do all of the right things, I think all of the right thoughts, and still I'm not happy. What's wrong? And so I can't always tell them bluntly. That would be cruel and it wouldn't do any good. So I try to find a way to tell them indirectly. But the problem is that you're trying to be happy. Happiness doesn't come from trying. It doesn't come from trying to grab onto happiness and hold on to it, and I'm going to keep it, I'm not going to let it go, because you find life rips it right out of your hands, and then you have a reaction. And so it's these issues that are going to form part of the talk. Why it is that happiness, if we try to make it the goal of life, we find it eludes us. So Swami Vivekananda, this person I mentioned, he said that happiness is not the goal of life, experience or knowledge is the goal of life. Experience means experience which leads us to wisdom and understanding. If we make that the goal of life, then suddenly happiness and sorrow both contribute to our understanding. They both contribute to who we are and our wisdom. If we try to be happy, then we're missing a large part of the lessons of life. And so that we'll go over also. So first, let me come to what is joy? What is joy? The art of inner joy, but what is joy itself? Well, we find that there are many different types of happiness or joy. There's ordinary pleasure. We have a good meal, whatever food you like most, you get some of it and you feel happy. Yes, that is happiness. The Buddha taught as the founding principle of Buddhism, that life is suffering. That sounds pretty gloomy. But as Buddhists will explain, that doesn't mean that everything is out and out misery in life. No, there's happiness and there's sorrow in life, but that everything in life is insufficient. Even our happy experiences are not enough. And so we go out for a nice meal and have a good meal and enjoy ourselves. That's one type of joy. We find happiness in the ordinary experiences of ordinary physical life. And yes, there's nothing wrong with that, and that's a legitimate pursuit. But the amount of joy we get from that is limited. The amount of happiness we get from it is limited. Whether you go for Thai food, or French cuisine, or Italian, or Mexican, or good old American food, whatever, the amount of happiness you can get from a meal is a certain amount. Yes, you get it, but it's a fixed amount. And after you eat and you digest, hopefully you digest it, then that experience is over, and until the next time you go to a restaurant or have a similar experience. So there's ordinary pleasure, and we don't deny that there is pleasure in life. Yes, certainly there is, and that's legitimate to seek that and to enjoy it for what it is. But there's only so much that we can have of it, only so much that's possible for it. And then there's the joy of excitement. We go to a party and everything's exciting and everybody's jumping up and down and we're all excited. That's another type of joy. But there's a problem there also, which is why we find that parties partly entertain us and partly exhaust us. And the more introverted you are, the more they exhaust you. But that's because in excitement, yes, there is a certain joy in excitement, but there's also the excitement itself. We find that it's a type of experience that makes the mind overstimulated, and we overreact. And so there's only a limited amount of joy that we can get from that excitement, and you can't remain excited. That's one of the false promises that modern life gives us through the media, through movies, through television, etc., is that it can be high on life. Everybody should be high on life all of the time. I want to be high on life. You can't. You can't. There are good times, there are bad times. There are happy times, there are sad times. There are successes, there are failures. All of that is part of life, and you can't avoid that. And so being high on life, you can work yourself into an excited state, but for how long? Without reaction. So that also, yes, if you go somewhere and it's exciting and you're having a good time, fine, be with that. But the mistake is we think that that's what we should have all of the time. No, we can't. It's just impossible, and we can see that it's impossible even with a little thought. Elation is another type of joy. Excited is when the mind and the senses are all like this. We're sort of electrified with the excitement about things. And elation when we feel something like we see a beautiful sunset or something, we feel uplifted, we feel inspired by something, we feel a sense of sublimity or something. That also is a higher type of joy that we recognize as a higher type of joy. We feel that elation. But that also we find after some time that ends, and we wish that we could get it back naturally. Then there's anticipatory joy. We say, a common example I use, and I'll explain why I use it very briefly. When I was thinking of coming this way, into this life, I was thinking of going to become a Hindu monk, of all things, in my little town in South Carolina. A friend of mine was was asking me why I was going to do that. And I said, I tried in my clumsy and ignorant way to explain what I was doing, because I just didn't have the tools to explain it well, even to myself. I just knew it was what I wanted somehow. So I said, well, you see, when you desire something you think is going to make you happy, but then you get it and you find it didn't make you happy. He said, no, that's not true at all. I want a motorcycle. And if I get a motorcycle, I'm going to be happy. Oh man, I'm going to be happy. And so then I started thinking, well, maybe I need a motorcycle. Maybe that would make me happy too. So, of course, I later realized it wouldn't. But yes, you have anticipation of getting, this is all introduction to say that my usual example is getting a motorcycle. I want a motorcycle. And I succeed in getting a motorcycle, and yes, I'm happy. So first there's the anticipation. I'm going to get something I want. But that also we know is not perfect. That's not perfect because it's dependent on getting something that I want. And I get it and I'm happy. But after a while, it's not that I start hating the motorcycle, it's just that that wasn't enough. There's something else that I want. And so that also is not the key to joy. There's the joy of fulfillment. Again, when you get something that you want. And the higher the nature of the thing, the more and the bigger the accomplishment, and the higher the sense of fulfillment that you have. That also is a true sense of joy. Then there's the joy of just peace. I remember when I was in elementary school, probably about the 4th grade or 5th grade, one or the other. I was walking home from school one day in the spring, and it was a beautiful spring day, and the sun was shining. And on the way home, I passed a number of houses, walking along the sidewalk. And it was the first day of spring when people were out cutting, had been out cutting their grass again. So there was a smell of freshly cut green grass. The sky was clear blue. It was neither hot nor cold. It was just that perfect, comfortable temperature. And I lay down on the grass in front of a house that I didn't know their owners or anything. I just lay down there and stared into the sky. And it was such a wonderful feeling of complete peace. I was happy because I was out of school, which at that time I hated. I was happy because there was nothing that I had to do, nothing I had to worry about, and just looking into the sky, the blue sky, smelling the cut grass, and just it's a memory of feeling complete peace. And so there's the joy of complete peace of mind. And so again, there are all of these types, and more than we can name, different types of joy that we experience, different sources and different, each one with its different nature, and also each one with its different reaction. We get some, and then we have a reaction to it. That is, we go up, and then there's the downward movement of the wave as well. So we recognize in all of these different types of joy that there's something which is similar, and then there are differences among them also. And if we examine them, if you look closely at all of these types of happiness or joy, you'll find that the difference largely is in the general state of mind that accompanies the experience of happiness. All of them you're feeling something of the nature of joy. But like an excited joy, the mind is going like this, electrified, and in anticipation there's, oh, I want to get it, I want to get it, I want to get it. And in peace there's just, complete relaxation into the experience. So there's the mental state which is accompanying the experience of joy. And so these different states of joy are colored by the state of the mind. Some types of joy we find are at the sensory level. That is, we see beautiful art, and that gives us one type of joy. We see beautiful scenery. We see a sunset type of joy, similar to seeing beautiful art. We hear beautiful music. We eat good food. Different types of sensory experience, but sense of joy that we get from these different types of sensory experience, through the eyes, through the ears, through the touch, etc. And then there's intellectual joy as well, mental joy, that which we get from, say, the joy that a mathematician gets in working out a beautiful theorem, or a scientist gets in making a discovery, or the types of mental, in fact, music actually is something which gives us more mental joy than sensory joy. It comes through the ears, but music has the power to go straight into the heart and mind and to change the very quality of our mental state. And so that really music is more mental than it is sensory. Even art, I shouldn't say even, art also, visual art. Also, it does something more to the mind than just eating a good pizza or something like that. Nothing wrong with pizza, I like pizza too. But that gives one type of experience, but artistic experience is more about how it affects the state of mind. So there's sensory joy, there's mental joy, and then there's spiritual joy. That is that which comes when the mind has been developed spiritually, to a point where joy starts to become more natural to us. And so that's where we're eventually going, because there we get a joy which is sustainable even in the midst of ordinary joys and sorrows of life. There's a higher joy which can be attained, which is not subject to the actions and reactions of ordinary life, which is there even in the midst of the ordinary sorrows of life. And so that's, again, where we want to go. So ordinary experiences of joy, that is short of what I would call a spiritual joy. Ordinary experiences of joy are subject to the actions and reactions of ordinary life. We get them and we lose them. We go up and we go down. And that's just part of natural life. Again, as I said, if we try to have only happiness, we find we can't, because happiness and sorrow are tied, happiness in the ordinary sense, ordinary happiness and ordinary sorrow are tied together. In fact, they're part of the same thing. You can't have one without having the other. It's like going to the hardware store and saying, I want a battery, but I only want a positive battery. I'm not into negativity, so I don't want the negative pole, I just want the positive pole of the battery. And you can't have that. If you buy a battery, you get the positive and the negative. If you buy a magnet, you get the positive and the negative. And so happiness and sorrow are part of the same thing. They're two poles of the same thing. We can't even understand what happiness is without contrasting it with sorrow. We can't understand sorrow without contrasting it with happiness. And so happiness and sorrow, happiness at the ordinary level is tied to sorrow. And so if we get one, we find that the other comes in its train, because the two are brought together. You could think of them as the action and the reaction of the mind. The mind gets one, and then the other comes as a reaction. And so that's why we find, when we're trying to be happy all the time, that happiness is continually coming, and it seems to hit us even harder the more we try to grab onto it. The more we try to grab onto it. So, is it possible to be happy all of the time? So let me now say a word, and I'll pull these things together. Let me now say a word about where happiness comes from. As I already said at the very beginning, happiness doesn't come from outside. I want a motorcycle, again, my example from my friend of long ago. I want a motorcycle. I get the motorcycle and I feel happy. Was the happiness in the motorcycle? I go to the shop, I give the money, now the motorcycle is mine and I feel happy. I got what I wanted. Now I can feel the wind blowing through my non-existent hair and I can speed down the roadway and have a good time and feel the freedom of the open road on my motorcycle. The happiness that I feel now, was it in the motorcycle? So now I paid for it, I get the motorcycle and it jumps inside of me and now I feel happy because it was there and now it's here? No. The happiness was here all of the time. If happiness is always an internal experience, as it is, it's easy to see that happiness is always experienced inside, not outside. If it's always inside, then shouldn't I be able to get happiness all of the time? As I said, not at one level, but another level, yes, and a level which is far more fulfilling than the ordinary happiness that I find myself seeking. And let me, for those of you who are getting nervous with the direction I'm going in, let me say that that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy the good things of life that you enjoy now. No, it doesn't mean that. But it means that you're no longer trying to hold on to that because you have nothing else. No, now you let experiences come and go as they do anyway. They do anyway. But now you've got something bigger and deeper and solid which doesn't leave you. So that's where we are going. So again, happiness, where does it come from? I told you the conclusion, but let me fall back from the conclusion and give you some other answers. Of course, one way of looking at it is that from the psychological standpoint, happiness is a state of the mind. And so you get the mind in a certain state and you feel happy. From a biochemical perspective, You have the secretion of certain hormones and chemicals in the mind, and you feel happiness as a result of those biochemicals and the biochemical reactions. From the ordinary standpoint, you get an experience and you feel happy. You feel that you were deprived of something, you get it, and now you feel happy. So from a psychological standpoint or from a physiological standpoint, it's either a state of the mind or it is a chemical reaction within the brain. But the experience of the Indian sages, and is not contrary to the sages of any tradition, Christian or Jewish or Islamic or any tradition, the experience of the sages was that real joy is not a product of the mind, nor is it a product of biochemicals. Those may be associated with it. When a person feels joy, there may be those things occurring, but that's not what causes it. If that's what causes it, then find something that causes the brain to continually secrete these chemicals so that you can always feel happy. No, that leads to addiction. That doesn't lead to happiness. Like we found with mice, that if they push a certain button, then they get a stimulus to the brain, which gives them the experience of happiness, and the mouse just goes on pushing the button all the time until they're completely exhausted. And exhausted to a state where it's not even enjoyable anymore. They just become addicted to that stimulation. That's not happiness. So the experience of the sages is that joy is our own nature. Joy is who we are inside. And that sounds strange and it sounds contrary to our experience. Then why aren't we happy all of the time? We're not happy all of the time because of the states of our minds. Because of the states of the mind. If we could learn to control the state of our mind, then we could be happy all of the time. My name, Atmarupananda, or Atmarupananda to give the Sanskrit pronunciation, non-Americanized Sanskrit pronunciation, means, not because that's who I've come to be, but it was given to me as an ideal that I should work for. It means he whose joy, Ananda, he whose joy is in his Atmarupa, that is, in his own nature. Or he for whom joy is his own nature. And so that's sort of that's an ideal presented in the Hindu tradition, that our nature is said to be Sat Chit Ananda. You don't need to remember these Sanskrit terms, of course, but that means existence, consciousness, and bliss. We are. We know that we are. And so I am, and I exist as a knower because I'm self-aware. I'm aware that I am. And in that awareness, if I can hold on to that awareness, that is the experience of joy. And so from a spiritual standpoint, and a philosophical standpoint, and I should say a true standpoint, experiential standpoint, not just philosophy that's idle philosophy, scratching the brain, just coming up with interesting theories, but an actual experiential true standpoint, that joy comes when the mind becomes quiet for me. Like when I was lying on that grass in front of the house on a summer day when I was in the 4th or 5th grade, just feeling complete peace. I wasn't expecting anything, I wasn't avoiding anything, just looking out into the endless sky and feeling completely free. The mind was free to be happy, for that joy that was my own nature to begin to bubble out, at least a little bit. When I get the motorcycle that I was anticipating, then I feel satisfaction. The mind suddenly feels, I got it. The mind relaxes, and the joy, which is my own nature, surfaces. And so in all of our experiences of happiness, there is something inside of us which is released. Not biochemicals. Yes, they may be released, and they may be associated with that experience. But the actual experience is not biochemical. And that we can clearly begin to experience with time. And we see it with the example of the mouse, who stimulated that biochemical reaction so much that it was practically about ready to kill it. There wasn't joy anymore. So that is where we can find a joy which isn't subject to reaction. At the level of pairs of opposites, happiness and sorrow, then that's going to come. So Again, Swami Vivekananda said that happiness is not the goal of life, that experience, meaning the wisdom which comes from experience, that is the goal of life. So what does that have to do with inner joy? I explained a little bit at the beginning, but let me go into that more. If I realize that the goal of my life is awakening, is understanding, is wisdom, then everything that happens to me, I find, contributes to that. Happiness as well as misery, success as well as failure. We spend so much of our life pursuing success and being terribly afraid of failure. Pursuing happiness and being terribly afraid, anxious about the misery which seems to be trailing us. But if I stop and just accept experience that comes to me, not trying to be miserable and not trying to avoid happiness, no, neither of those, but just accepting the experiences that come to me with the understanding that everything is giving me experience, and through that experience everything has the ability to awaken my understanding. Then I find that I begin to experience a joy which is superior to anything that I knew before. What I call the happiness of getting a motorcycle, what I call the happiness of eating a piece of pizza or whatever. Yes, that's real. There's nothing wrong with it. But I begin to find something which is much higher than that. And that's, I can still enjoy those other things if I want to, but I have something which is sustainable, or not even sustainable. It's natural. It's my natural condition. And that's what I want, to get to that natural condition where I begin to experience the joy which is my own nature, which is not subject to the actions and reactions of life, which we're constantly being buffeted by the waves of life. But in the midst of that, if I know that every experience that comes to me has a message inside of it for me. It may not be labeled, usually not labeled. I may not quite understand what the message is, but every experience is giving me something. One of the strange things, you could say it's a spiritual law of the universe, and I don't want it to sound dogmatic. I'm just making a statement as if it's saying that this is true without any proof of it. But I can say that if you follow the logic of it, eventually you'll find that it is true in experience. That is that we find in time that every experience I have, positive and negative, good and bad, high and low, every experience I have in life was somehow tailor-made for me. That's not egocentric. That's not selfish. That's just recognizing that the universe for each one of us is a reflection of ourselves. The universe is constantly reflecting back to us that which we need in the moment. And sometimes it's success, sometimes it's failure. When I was 43, going on 44, I had never studied Spanish in my life. But I was living in San Diego and wanted to study Spanish. I love languages, and I've learned several. And I wanted to learn Spanish because I was living close to the Mexican border, and used to go down there and feel bad that I couldn't communicate. So I started learning Spanish. This was when I was getting into my mid-40s, and so I'd been out of school for many, many years, for decades, 20-something years. And so I was out of the habit of schoolwork. I had been a good student, but now I was long past that. So when I started studying Spanish, going to the community colleges and then to San Diego State University, I worked hard to get up to speed with my studies again. And so when I got a perfect score on a test in Spanish class, then good, I got a perfect score, now I'm going to other things. And I didn't remember anything from the test. If I made a mistake, I said, why did I make a mistake? I'd go back and look and say, oh, I put this, but it was supposed to be that. And I would make a mark in the mind and I would remember it. I learned far more from my mistakes than I did from my successes. And that's true in life in general. We'll find that it's our failures, our mistakes, the difficulties we went through that had a greater impact on our lives than the successes. That doesn't mean avoid success, doesn't mean try to fail, I didn't start trying to get things wrong on my Spanish tests. It just sort of naturally happened. But I was thankful for it when it did happen, because I realized that, no, now here I've learned something. This is something that was sticking in my mind. And so if we learn to see that everything in life has something to give, including failure, then my orientation to life and my experience of life is different. And then I begin to, again, see what I spoke about a few moments ago, that is, a few minutes ago, that I begin to feel a sense of joy in the midst of the experiences of life. Some of you have no doubt heard of the Bhagavad Gita, one of probably the most famous Hindu text. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, the teacher of the Gita, he says over and over again in different ways, Siddhya Siddhyo Samo Bhutva, having become the same in success and failure. Labha Labho Dvayadriyo, becoming the same in attainment and non-attainment, in conquest or defeat, becoming the same in both. Then the mind rises to a higher state. So again, this has nothing to do with sabotaging oneself, with trying to be a failure, trying to mess up, or anything like that. It means that even when we're going through life and trying to do our best with everything, sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. Sometimes things go well, sometimes they don't go well. Sometimes everything in life is going very well for us, and then suddenly a dear one dies. We have no control over it. Somebody that we loved is gone. And it happens to all of us if we live long enough, that we lose people that we love. And yet, in the midst of those experiences, if I hold on to the idea that the purpose of my life is not to avoid such experiences, the purpose of my life is not to always be happy in the superficial sense, party-going happy, and not ever to experience any sadness or tragedy or anything, then I find that, no, I'm beginning to find a stability in the midst of my experience. And that stability in the midst of my experience of all of the ups and downs of life, there's something that's remaining the same within my mind. That again begins to allow the joy which is natural to my own nature, which is my own nature, to surface. Again, if happiness, if joy, I should say, because joy usually we understand as something above happiness. Happiness usually is used for a lower type of experience of joy. If joy is comes when my mind is in a certain state, then again, as I said at the beginning, I should be able to attain that state more and more often. But again, it's not so much even attaining a state of mind, it's attaining a state of being. And that state of being is tied to understanding this meaning of life. When we suffer, if there's meaning in the suffering, it's no longer the same suffering. There's something that we're gaining from it. If we suffer without meaning, then it's just suffering, just useless suffering. If we see meaning within the suffering, then suddenly the suffering itself is transformed. And then again, we find a ray of that joy that's coming through our experience. So, in one of the traditions of Vaishnava tradition, one of the traditions of Hinduism, it said that on the spiritual path, one should learn to avoid, one should have anudharsha, and one should avoid excessive elation and excessive depression. That is, to try to keep the mind even keeled. Because when the mind is even keeled, then we find that we can process the experiences that come to us. If a good wave comes and carries us up into over-elation, then there's going to be a reaction. And if we allow a sad experience to just destroy us, then that also is bad. And so one of the keys to learning to attain to a state where inner joy is accessible to us more and more, until eventually it becomes continuous, then is this attaining to a stability of mind, so that I'm not carried away by the experiences of life. There's a beautiful song, and I'll stop in just a moment to see if there are any questions. But there's a beautiful song where everyone has their own taste in music, but one of the singers that I'm very fond of, a Canadian singer who sings Celtic songs, is Lorena McKinnon. I don't know if any of you know Lorena McKinnon. But one of her songs is Dante's Prayer. And in Dante's Prayer, she sings these lines as the refrain, that cast your eyes on the ocean, cast your soul to the sea. Cast your eyes on the ocean, cast your soul to the sea. That's a wonderful line. And I listen to that song over and over, just trying to melt myself into those words and to remember them. I have to get a little philosophical to explain what I think she's talking about, or certainly what she's talking about to me, whether it's what she knows she's talking about or not, and certainly what I hear and what it means to me. But I think it is what she intends. Otherwise, there's no reason for saying that. All of us, our mind, the more ocean-like our mind becomes, then the more we can contain all of the experiences of life. It says in the Upanishads, the ancient scriptures of India, some of the ancient scriptures, part of the Vedas, it says, Nalpe sukhamasti. There is no happiness in the small. Bhumaiva sukham. Only the vast is happy. So like that happiness I felt lying on the grass, looking into the vast space. And like that, my very first memory I have was when I was 2 years old. I still remember my diaper. I was wearing a diaper. My mother had one hand, and a lady friend of hers had, Virginia Baxter, had the other hand. And we were at the beach in Florida on vacation, and they were taking me out into the ocean. I was just a little baby, still wearing a diaper, and they were holding my hands, and I just remember looking out at the ocean and being overcome with this sense of vastness. There's no end to it, water everywhere, nothing but water. The blue sky and the endless ocean, and feeling such a sense of peace. So that first memory that I have is one of expansiveness, one of great peace and joy. And so, in the small there is no happiness. Only in the vast there is happiness. And so we have to make our hearts oceans. Oceans which can absorb everything. If an elephant walks into a small pool of water, then it splashes all of the water out of the pool and onto the banks. If the elephant steps into the ocean, it means nothing to the ocean. And so we should make the experiences of life like that. Keep our eyes on the ocean, cast our soul to the sea, that is to become the sea. So that the experiences come to us and they come into the ocean which they can't disturb. We accept them. Yes, come happiness, come. You are welcome. And misery, you also are welcome. If you're coming, I can't avoid you yet. Again, it doesn't mean that if there's a misery that we can avoid that we shouldn't. Yes, do. That's just for common sense. But there are experiences we can't avoid. And so those, just accept them. And find that, no, I'm bigger than the experience. We have to be bigger than even the good and evil of life. One of the great questions in religion, for people of all religions, is why the existence of evil. And so different people have different explanations for why there is evil and what we're to do with it. But evil, or at least bad things, happen. They happen to good people. And so that which we normally interpret as evil, it happens. But I have to be big enough to be larger, to a container large enough to be unaffected by the good and evil in life also. That doesn't mean not being compassionate for others who are suffering. No, if you become an ocean, you become more compassionate because you're not afraid for yourself. You become large enough so that you can take other people into yourself. You're not constantly feeling the fragile sense of self that you have to protect yourself from everything and everybody else. And so we have to learn to become big. That's one of the reasons why meditation is such a wonderful art, because it begins to teach you how to expand the heart so that the experiences of life come into it like the elephant entering the ocean. There's a beautiful verse in the Gita, at the end of the second chapter, where Sri Krishna says that all sorts of desires and impressions and thoughts enter into the heart of the sage. But like rivers entering into the ocean remains the same, so the heart of the sage is unaffected by all of the experiences coming in. And so if we can learn to be large, learn not to be small, little, vulnerable, weak people, but learn to be large. Learn to include the whole world within my heart. That has nothing to do with introversion or extroversion. Introverts can do it, extroverts can do it, everyone can do it. It has to do with learning to be open to life and open to the experiences of life. So I'm not trying to hide from some things and run towards other things. Just accepting life as it is, then I begin to find that the joy which is natural to me, it begins to come up more and more. And I begin to find that when I feel that I'm missing it, when I'm out of balance, then I can stop, put the mind back into it and say, no, it's still there. I was gone somewhere, but that's still there. Let me come back to it. So let me stop here, because I could go on like that for a while. But then see if there are any questions.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
You said that you had entered the monastic life. I've heard that when some of the monks came out of Lhasa, for instance, Tibetan Buddhism, and they started being out in the world more, that they had been well trained, but the teachings that they were, their experience was causing them to use their teachings, and that expanded their worlds a lot. So
Yes.
in a sense, what I would call from a Buddhist perspective, it's a lot more of a Mahayanist or a middle view.
Yes.
So that if the monk is in the monastery and doesn't have the experience of being in a public world, then that experience I'm not saying it's smaller, it's just different. But how do you see that relationship of the monastic to the public?
That's a very good question, and it's a very important question. Again, I'll refer back, I can mention again Swami Atmarupananda, not because you need to remember his name or anything, but just because I'm referring to his idea, it's not my idea, so I want to attribute it where it came from. He used to say, he was the founder of our organization, he used to say that it's time for the teachings of spirituality to come out of the forest monasteries and enter into the market of the world. I myself have seen good monks living in remote places in the Himalayas, like Dakota living in caves, and I've gone and stayed with them there in caves. I've seen that some of these people, they were good people, they were sincere, they'd been trying and living a life for many years. But if something happened that they weren't expecting, they were completely thrown off kilter. Because they were used to, they lived in a cave, they were protected from the world, protected from people, they had their own routine, their own little life, and they were in their own way, they were sincere, doing their practice, doing their meditation and everything, but they had everything under their control. But suddenly life interferes. Life interferes, and then they're undone, because they had everything under control, but they couldn't control this, and so I saw that, no, there's something wrong in the picture. There's something wrong there. In our tradition within Hinduism, the Ramakrishna tradition, we're taught that whatever practice we do, and we're open to a variety of practices and approaches, but whatever practice we do, everyone should do what is called karma yoga. That is spiritual practice in action, doing action involved with people and so forth, because that constantly tests our spiritual development. It's easy for me to live in my cave and have my the provisions brought to me, and to have my regular meditation and everything, and to think that I'm doing great. I never get angry, I never get upset. But then I come out of the cave and go into town, and somebody bumps into me and suddenly I'm angry. And then I realize, oh, my meditation was not as deep as I thought it was. It's a practical life, in an engaged life. It's constantly testing the state of our mind. And so that's a very good thing. And it gives me feedback whether I'm really practicing or whether I've just settled into a routine where nothing bothers me, because I protect my routine. So no, that's very true. And it is that testing, it may be good for some people, it may be good for many people, if they have the chance to spend some years in solitude or something. There's nothing wrong with that if the person is qualified and they have the opportunity to do it. But eventually a person needs to be tested in ordinary practical life. Otherwise, there's every chance of something missing. And thinking that I've attained something I haven't attained just because there's nothing that tests me. And another question, yes?
Where does the joy of service fit into this context?
Yes, that's a very good question. The joy of service. That's something which is very important because we find that one of the things that makes us unhappy, as I said towards the end of the talk, was our smallness, being small, being restricted, being selfish. And so part of expanding, to let the whole universe into myself, is learning to be unselfish, to do things and to think for others. That is not well, let me rephrase that. There are some modern psychologists who point to a real problem. That is, people who are afraid to do anything for themselves. They're always thinking about others, and they say, no, I'm not worth anything. I'm no good. I don't ever think about myself. Even when I pray, I always pray for other people. I wouldn't pray for me because I'm no good and everything. No, that's a problem. If we have that, we have to learn respect for ourselves as well as for other people. So service doesn't mean I'm no good, let me do things for other people because I'm no good. No, service means let me expand so that my world, the larger my world is, then the bigger I am and the more joy I have. If it's if I'm happy eating a good meal myself, if I can provide that to more people, then I should be even more happy. Because my circle has become larger. My circle of life has become larger. One of the things that causes us a lot of misery is feeling isolated and cut off. And so even if you live by yourself in a cave somewhere, you can learn to be expansive and learn to include the whole world. And you can live in the midst of the busiest city and be completely alone. And so wherever we are, to learn to include the world within myself. And so service, that is, service is a word, English word, which is used a lot in the Hindu tradition for seva. Seva, the Sanskrit word, used in all in Sikhism and Hinduism and Buddhism. The word seva is very common. So it means doing good to others, offering service to others. So that is a part of spiritual life because that expands my circle. It expands my concerns beyond myself. If I have a depression, and I'm not speaking here of clinical depression, which needs clinical help, and which many people have, and that's okay, that it needs a clinical help. But if I'm just depressed or something for temporary state of mind, getting out of myself is one of the best ways to bring myself out of depression. By not thinking of, one of the things that depression does to us is to make me overly concerned with my own state of mind. And I just get more and more depressed the more I sort of close up in myself. If I can open out of that shell and look and see that there are other people around me, let me do something. Then that is one way of breaking through a temporary depression. And so service is extremely important. In our particular order, that was put as one of the twin pillars of the order. The motto of our order is Atmarupananda Jagat Hitaya Cha. For one's own liberation, salvation, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, for one's own liberation, and for the good of the world. That those are the twin ideas. To attain to enlightenment myself, but not just for myself, but to work for others. Like in Mahayana Buddhism, one of the pillars of Mahayana Buddhism and one of the distinctions of Mahayana Buddhism is the Bodhisattva ideal, working for the enlightenment of others. And so that was an idea that was very dear to our founder, that the Mahayana Buddhist idea of the Bodhisattva. Any other questions?
Swamiji?
Yes.
So, tonight's topic is art of inner joy.
Yes.
So my question is actually how to achieve that art, how to attain that art.
Yes, we attain it in general in the way that I said. That is, by attaining to a stability of mind, a calmness of mind, a largeness of spirit, a finding the meaning in the experiences of life, so that I find in all of the dualities of life, I begin to find meaning. And then one of the techniques techniques for fire, and also service. Well, one of the techniques pertaining to that is the art of meditation. Not that everyone has to go to get there through meditation, but it's one of the classic ways of attaining to that state. And meditation here means not just Oriental style meditation, but it can be through Christian prayer also. People think that, meditation is what Hindus and Buddhists do, and prayer is what Christians and Jews and Muslims do. But no, Hindus pray, Buddhists pray also. Buddhists don't even believe in God. But in the path of the Mahayana, prayer and worship is one of the stages of the Bodhisattva, to pray and to worship the Bodhisattvas. And in Hinduism, prayer is extremely important. And so I mention that because prayer itself is one of the best ways to enter into meditation. It's starting a dialogue with the divine reality, opening a channel of communication through the veil of forgetfulness, which has made me forget the reality of this universe, the reality of my own self, which is divine. And so prayer opens like a channel into that reality, which is right here, right now, but we don't see it. Right here, right now. And so prayer is a way of opening a channel, and that leads into meditation. So that you find among the Christian mystics, when they talk about deeper states of prayer, they're really talking about states of meditation and samadhi. They still call it prayer because it was prayer that started with vocal prayer, and by a natural process it led into what we call in our tradition meditation and then samadhi and then enlightenment, the prayer of union. So that you find people like Saint Angelina de Foligno, a great Italian mystic of the late Middle Ages or early Renaissance, I forget when, but somewhere in the middle there. She said that in my deepest states of prayer, I came to a state where I went beyond the Trinity, beyond God the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit. She was a Christian, of course, so I went beyond the Trinity into the heart of the Godhead, where it was beyond even all idea of relationship. And there I could not find where God begins or where I end. That I could find no distinction, only God everywhere. I lost myself in the heart of God. And so that she entered in through prayer. And so meditation is one of the techniques, which includes prayer and worship, one of the techniques developed for bringing the mind into a state where this inner joy is accessible. But to support meditation by itself needs support. And so the other things that I said about finding a sense of meaning to life, finding a stability of mind, learning to accept all of the experiences of life, those are the way to get inner joy. There's not a trick. You're not go home and mix a little of that, mix a little of that, swirl it around, cook it for 2 hours, and drink it, and then you've got it. No, there are no recipes for attaining to inner joy. It's there within you already. It's just a question of allowing it to come out, learning to allow it to come out. Yes?
If we are the only arbiters of acknowledging the experience of inner joy, how do we avoid false positives?
Yes, that's a very good question. Because that's one of the criticisms of mysticism or spiritual life. It's all internal. Science demands that everything be peer-reviewed and people look at it and examine it and try to replicate it and everything, and that's good. That's what good science does. Whereas mysticism is all inside, and people imagine all kinds of things and say, oh, I had some illumination and I had this, and it's all just superficial bosh. Well, no. One thing is that not that you have to belong to a temple, not that you have to belong to a tradition, but that's one of the things that a living tradition of spirituality is meant to do. That a teacher who has experience, man or woman, who has experience, that they can help guide you in whether what you're experiencing is real or not. Higher experience is self-authenticating, but only the very highest. Until then, we need some sort of check. So one check is to see what great souls of the past and present have experienced and see if I seem to be going in that direction. But then also, yes, we can fool ourselves. And so having some sort of external help is a great benefit. If we find someone who we have the faith that this person has gone far ahead of me, then let me check my experience with them and see if see how it compares. Because that is an inherent danger. When with an internal experience, without some sort of check, then we may just be having happy thoughts and living in a fantasy world. Yeah. And maybe, I think, let me just, I'll get to you, let me just ask for those who are the sort of, I think time is up, so.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay. I'll take your question, and if there's one more question.
Okay, so you're talking about the external experiences as part of the internal life.
Yes.
So how would you describe curiosity as being an aid to finding experiences of all kinds? So rather than being turned inward, this kind of a wakefulness of curiosity arises.
Yes, yes. Well, curiosity, one of the things that we find in children, one of the wonderful qualities in children is curiosity about everything. The mind is open, the mind is fresh, and everything elicits a sense of wonder. As we grow older, I've been there, but I've done that, that's not something to be. And we miss the wonders that are right in front of us, the wonders that are right in front of us. And so as the mind becomes deeper and calmer, something of that childlike curiosity comes back to us. Not the idle curiosity of just, oh, I'm just interested in everything. That's okay if we're of that temperament, but that's not necessary to get to develop that or to try to develop it. But a natural curiosity, a wonder at everything comes. I remember one of my teachers, I was his assistant up in the Himalayas for 5 years. He was a very, he's still alive, I can say he was, he still is. A very great man, a great spiritual person, intellectually very great also, one of the most brilliant men I ever met. But one of the characteristics of him I learned quickly when I began to work with him was that he had this childlike curiosity about everything. So when he came, I was already living there in the Himalayas in a very remote ashram, and he came as the new editor. I was the assistant to the editor. And so I was showing him around the warehouse where we stored the things for the editorial paper. And as I was showing him things that I thought were important on the shelf, he saw a pile of neatly stacked empty matchboxes, the wooden type with the drawer. And he picked one of them up and said, you know, a matchbox is such a wonderful phenomenon. You see how simple it is. Just this rectangular shape and this simple drawer, which just slides in and out. How simple the shape of it is, and yet how useful it is. And he was filled with wonder looking at this little empty matchbox. And so I thought, no, that's a wonderful mind that can see with wonder everything. And so the more the mind becomes calm and steady, the more we find the sense of wonder that's in everything. How wonderful it is, the power of words. We use them all the time, but we never look at them. Someone is suffering, and another person comes up and puts her hand on the shoulder of the person who's weeping and says a few words. And suddenly the person lifts their head and they wipe their eyes and smile. What has happened? This woman just came up and made some sounds, vibrated her vocal cords, just made some sounds. And yet the other person was transformed suddenly from weeping, they smile and feel consoled. Of course, it's more than just sounds, but we forget the magic of language, the power of language. Language is just, at the physical level, language is just making sounds, rattling the vocal cords. But what power it is. Another person comes along and says something to somebody and they smack him right in the face. He just made sounds with his vocal cords, but look at the effect he had on the person. So we're ignoring things like that all of the time. So-called, because it's only so-called, primitive societies, and children are very aware of the magic of language. When I was a kid, I'd go to my mother and say, oh, Howard called me such and such a name. And my mother would say, it's just a name. I think, what do you mean it's just a name? I felt it was smeared all over me. And so, yes, she was right. And I had to learn just to take it as just a name and to say that it didn't affect who I was. But children are very aware of the magic of language, and so-called primitive tribes are aware of that also. We forget it because we become hardened. Yeah, Lori.
I'm a person of very big feelings, and I kind of really long for that stability of mind that isn't quite such big waves. And I'm wondering, as I listen, if some of those big emotions, like rage, for example, are really just a permutation of sorrow or of suffering, and then also in this what seems to us who are living in it to be a massively polarized time. It might not be any different than any other time. How to have that calm and that stability of mind, and yet still be taking a stand for goodness and truth. And
that's a very good question. Very good question. Maybe start with the last part of it. That being able to remain steady, being able to remain ocean-like in our heart, being able to that which is happening in the world, but